Yura woke up and half opened his eyes and saw the numbers on the side of the smart alarm clock, 6:58. In 2 minutes, the alarm will ring, but in the meantime, you can still lie down with your eyes closed, listening to Julia's sleepy breathing on the pillow next to you. Immediately, he frowned and reached out to touch her skin, so velvety before dawn. My hand came across something cold. He turned his head. Yelka was lying very close. Her skin was icy and wet, her bare shoulders sticking out from under the blanket as if covered with a film of mucus. A white stripe is visible from under the half-closed eyelids. "Julia?" The alarm clock rang sharply and she opened her eyes. It seemed that when she saw him, hatred flashed in her eyes, but it immediately disappeared. Then she abruptly stood up and left. The bathroom door slammed, and there was the sound of running water. "You seem to have a fever," he shouted after her, but there was no answer. "Something is wrong." Yes, something is wrong with Julia and has been for a long time. And maybe with him too. He has been sleeping badly for several nights now, and he hears sounds and rustles through his sleep as if someone is wandering around the bed. He put aside his thoughts because a smell got into his nose, vile, unpleasant, and threw back the blanket. There was a dark wet spot on the sheet where Yelka was sleeping. Brown moisture was spreading out from under the shreds of some threads. The stench hit my nose, as if a sewer pipe had been opened nearby. "Julia," he muttered. "Ugh. What is it, huh? Damn. From where? Julia? Are you crazy?" He gathered the soiled sheet into a ball and headed for the bathroom. The door was locked, and he could hear the jet from the faucet hitting the tin edge. "Julia?" She didn't answer. He pushed on the door, shook it. Silence. "Open it for me." "I can't." "Later," she shouted with a kind of fury, and then another. "Go away." With annoyance, he threw a stinking sheet near the door and himself, hastily dressed, went out and slammed the door. "I'll have to stop by my mom's. He will tell her that the water has been turned off." But the mother is also a mother, that it is difficult to deceive her. Only when she saw him did she throw up her hands. They quarreled. "Mom, I'm going to wash my face," he said, blocking her questions with the door. And when he came out of the bathroom, a cup of coffee and his favorite pancakes were already waiting for him on the table. So far, only 2, the rest were still frying and smelled all over the apartment. His feet carried him into the kitchen of their own accord. "Mom, you have a superpower. How did you make the dough in 2 minutes and fry it already? You'll have your own children, you'll understand," she smiled. "Come on, eat. I'll cook some more." He didn't have to be persuaded. He put the pancake in his mouth entirely and, closing his eyes, began to chew. "What, Julia doesn't cook breakfast now?" Mom asked. "She doesn't cook at all," he blurted out before he had time to think. And he wasn't going to complain at all. They'll figure it out for themselves. "What has been going on with you lately?" He just sighed. What can I say if he doesn't understand himself? It's hard for her. After that incident. Well, you know. It takes time. Mom nodded. I know. But maybe she should see a doctor? What are they called? Psychologists? Yes, psychologists. I mean them. How is she doing anyway? What's wrong with her? Mom asked and added more pancakes. Yura shook his head. She's become kind of weird. She doesn't go anywhere. She's silent. She looks at the wall. She's withdrawn into herself and doesn't want to talk about anything. He wanders around the apartment at night and brings garbage to bed. He eats all sorts of nasty things. I brought the pie, but it wasn't fresh. But she ate it anyway. Nothing, everything will be fine. You need time and help. Will you find her a doctor? He nodded. Yes, I will. Yura said goodbye and left. He did not tell his mother only one thing. Instead of wanting to help, he feels only irritation and anger towards Yulia. If she disappeared right now, he would only be happy. It's strange, not so long ago he couldn't imagine life without her. Until that very day. Yura started the car, and in his mind he went back again to that summer day when he and Yulia went to Lake Alexandrovskoye. It was a weekday, only they were on the beach, and some children came from the village. And later, a car arrived on the other side, 2 couples poured out of it, turned on music and started yelling and screaming, running along the beach. He and Yulka settled down on a blanket, took a swim, and ate. Yura quietly pulled out a box with a fish pendant on a chain from the glove compartment. He returned and sat down as if nothing had happened. Julia looked at him slyly with narrowed eyes. "What is it?" He couldn't stand it. "Our anniversary is on Sunday, remember?" "I forgot. I'm sorry," he said and laughed. "That's how I believed you, you fool," she chuckled. "Listen, you're working on Sunday. And I thought, today is such a good day. So here's a gift for you. In advance, but for the anniversary. Come on." He burst out laughing when he saw the box, and she even frowned a little, but then he took out his own and she laughed out loud too. "Is this for me? What a cool pendant." "Of course you are, you're my fish." Then Julia went for a swim, and he stayed on the shore, sat, drank beer, watched her swim, cutting through the water with confident, calm strokes. So she turned face up, and for a while froze on the water. It was generally easy for her to lie on the water, but Yura could not do that. He was sinking gradually. He got up and pulled another bottle of beer out of the trunk, searched for a long time for the bottle opener, then took a long sip, and only after that looked back at the lake. Julia was not there. The wind was driving low waves, children were splashing along the shore, but she was not there. At first he didn't even worry. Yulka was a great swimmer. She loved diving. He watched, waited, even took another sip, but she never appeared. Then, throwing the bottle on the sand, he rushed to the water, desperately trying to remember exactly where he had seen her last. He swam with wide strokes, dived. Nothing was visible through the murky water, and with increasing despair he began to realize that there was almost no chance of finding her. He sank down to the very day, touched the soft bed of silt with his feet, exhaled the last of the air and swam up, surfaced, screamed. "Help me! Help! My girlfriend is drowning!" The couples at the car turned in his direction, put their palms together, trying to see what was happening. The sun beat into their faces, hindered them. He dived back into the green murk, cursing that they had come here instead of staying at home. He was swimming underwater on his last breath of air. Sparks were already flickering before his eyes, when suddenly something grazed his shoulder, and looking up, he saw her hand. His hand was hanging limply, palm up. He pulled at her, but her hand wouldn't budge. It was as if something was holding her back. Then he tried to feel for something. Nothing is visible in the murky water. Yulka's body swayed limply, like algae. He realized by touch that one of her legs was stuck in a snag and tried to pull it out, but it didn't work. There was very little time. The ringing was growing in my head. We need to decide what to do. If he lets her go now, he won't find her anymore. It's some damn accident that he stumbled upon her, and if he doesn't let her go, he'll stay here himself. He pulled Julia up with the last of his strength. She didn't give in. My chest burned, my lungs burned with fire, and there was not a single thought left in my head. Yura let go of her hand and floated up to the saving light. But he didn't have enough strength. He froze in the murky greenery, opened his mouth and inhaled water. The guys from the car helped them, somehow found them and pulled them ashore. Yura came to his senses already on the sand. Yulia was given artificial respiration, and not immediately, but she came to her senses. They drove home, staying in the far right lane, and when they returned, Yulka immediately went to bed without even taking a shower. She wrapped herself in a blanket and lay still. He lay there for a long time and shuddered, remembering how the mud-smelling water flowed into his lungs. What a fool he was not to take those guys' phones. I should have taken it, thanked him for saving me. Then he fell asleep. And he was not at all surprised that he had a nightmare that night. As soon as he fell asleep, I dreamed that someone was walking around the apartment, trampling, muttering something. He opened his eyes and saw that Yulka was sitting on the bed with her back to him and trembling, looking out the window. "What's the matter with you?" She turned her face to him. Her eyes were empty and water was dripping from her hair. She lifted her lips and he saw that she had mud and a fishtail in her mouth. He screamed, and now he's really awake. Julia was there. There was no mud on her. Immediately, she turned around and opened her eyes. "I had a nightmare." "Nothing," he said. "And I can't sleep at all. I'm so scared." She sobbed and he hugged her, wanting to calm her, to support her, and she attacked him as if hungry. Her kisses were interspersed with bites, not strong. She only touched him with her teeth and immediately hid them. And in the morning she said that she didn't have the strength to go anywhere and she would stay at home. There was nothing strange about it, and he left her and left. From that day on, everything began. Julia went quiet, sleepy all the time. When he came home from work, she was almost always dozing, and if she wasn't dozing, she was staring at the wall. She answered all the questions that she was stressed. I dropped out of school, didn't answer my friends' calls. And then he started hearing strange noises and noises at night. And it only got worse. In the evening, when he returned, the house was dark, the lights were off, and the kitchen was empty. There is nothing but the ready-made pizza that he buys. The meat that he took out in the morning and asked to cook is still lying untouched in the refrigerator. Sighing, he put the kettle on and warmed up the pizza. Will the doctor help? Is he even needed? Maybe he could use a doctor himself? He hears all these noises at night. Then an idea came to mind, and instead of tea, he brewed himself strong coffee. In the bedroom, Yulka's silhouette was discernible in the bed. The blanket was pulled over her head. She was breathing sleepily. "Are you asleep?" he asked. I wanted to talk. She didn't even move. "Shouldn't we go to the doctor, huh? What do you say?" He waited, then said, "All right. Good night." I lay down next to him and closed my eyes. Usually he was so tired that he fell asleep easily and quickly, but that night he fought sleep with all his might, lay still and breathed evenly. My head was spinning, but the coffee was doing its job. Through his eyelashes, he saw the clock say midnight. Yulka suddenly sat up abruptly. She looked around, got up and walked around the bed. She stood at the foot of the bed, looking at him. There was a sharp sound outside and she turned her head. Her body remained in the same position, only her neck moved, as if on hinges, so that he first saw her ear in front of him, and then he could see her hair, wet with sweat. They were tangled in a ball at the back of her head. His throat was choked with horror and he couldn't stand it, and screamed, "Julia?" She immediately turned back, silently walked around the bed, lay down next to it and pulled the blanket over her. He lay there, his heart pounding, until it was light. The next evening he found the apartment dark again. The meat in the refrigerator has let the juice out. She didn't even boil the kettle, it was standing the same as it was in the morning when he left. He fried the meat and brewed himself some strong coffee again. The thoughts were heavy, nothing good came to mind. I wanted to get up and leave here. A sound in the back of the apartment made him jump. Something flopped on the floor, rolled over. He stood up, peering into the gloom. Strange sounds were repeated. It seemed that someone was trying to get up and could not. Then the rustling stopped, and he heard footsteps, hesitant, as if the old man was walking along the corridor, leaning on the walls. A light flashed on. Squinting, he saw Julia in the depths of the corridor. She stood there and looked at him from the darkness. "Hi," he said through dry lips. "Hello. I'm going to bed." He nodded. She turned around and shuffled back to the bedroom. He watched her go for a few seconds, and then took a can of adrenaline out of his backpack and drank it in one gulp. Falling asleep next to her suddenly seemed to him the most terrible thing that could happen. He closed his eyes and waited. The noise on the street was fading, cars were passing less and less below. Finally, Julia got up. She walked around the bed, stood at the foot of it again, and stared at him for a long time without moving. Then she came closer, bent over him and froze. A terrible stench filled his nose when her breath touched his cheek. He stood it, too. Finally, Julia clacked her teeth and straightened up, began to rustle something softly. She walked around the bed from all sides, as if looking for something on the floor. He watched with half-open eyes as she gathered her things, but she did it as if she didn't quite know how to dress. It seemed to take an effort for her to figure out how to put on a sweater, how to fit socks. She sighed, smacked her lips, and her teeth chattered against each other. So that's what kind of noises he heard. He didn't dream about it. Finally, when she was dressed, she left the room. He waited for a while, wondering what she was doing, when suddenly the front door slammed. Jumping up, he grabbed his clothes and began to put them on, looking out the window. The door in the entrance opened. Julia went outside. He noticed which way she was going and ran after her. Ducking and hiding behind bushes, he watched her wander through the streets, stumbling, swaying like a drunk. At last they came to an old house, covered with a grid along the facade. It was a manor house that was built in ancient times. Now the estate has fallen into disrepair. They wanted to demolish it, but the activists proved its historical value and fenced the estate, took out all the insides, leaving only brick, plastered walls, and roof. The facade was covered with a printed canvas. A sign was put up that the house was being renovated and left for a year. Over the winter, part of the canvas faded and fell off. The screens that covered the windows broke and flew in strips in the weak night wind. Julia stood for a few moments near the hole in the fence and then dived inside. After waiting a bit, he followed. He listened for a while, made sure that no one was nearby, and entered the building. It was pitch dark there, and only through the cracks in the windows clogged with profiled sheets did streaks of light penetrate. Plaster was knocked down and lay in heaps on the floor. Piles of empty boxes, broken bricks, and other construction debris lay underfoot. Through the removed doors, a long suite of rooms could be seen, drowning in darkness. There was a rustle far ahead. Ducking, he followed the sound, but soon realized that it was a half-torn piece of sheathing. It was being stirred by the wind, penetrating through a hole in the roof. Yura reached the large hall in the center of the building. There are still remnants of a wide staircase running in a semicircle to the second floor. The stone balusters of the railing were held up in some places on the gallery of the second. Once there were balls or meetings held here. Even the skeleton of the old fountain remains in the center. From this point, he could see the entire building, all the windows and nooks. No one. Julia seemed to have disappeared. Slowly picking his way through the construction debris, he wandered forward. Maybe she came out the other side? But there was a blocked exit and there was no way out. Completely confused, he wandered back. Through the protruding teeth of the iron skeleton, past debris and stone chips, he walked around the premises a second time, shining his phone, but found no one. Julia disappeared. For the last time he illuminated the space around. The weak light of a flashlight illuminated the peeling walls, and suddenly in one of the niches he noticed a marble, well-preserved statue. Why was she left here? He went to look, turned away while climbing over a pile of broken boxes, and when he looked again, the niche was empty. Did it seem? Shining a flashlight in all directions, he looked around and suddenly turned cold. On the edge of the fountain, in the hall, the same white stone statue froze. He stared at her for a few moments, feeling the hairs on his arms stand on end. He turned off the light of the flashlight, blinked, looked again. She was gone now. It became really scary. Backing away, he headed for the exit. I happened to look up. A white, smooth figure hung on the ceiling, clinging to the ceiling directly above his head. He blinked in disbelief. Moving with all four limbs, she moved straight across the ceiling, dived into a crack, and disappeared. Yura screamed and rushed away. He returned home 2 hours later, visiting a 24-hour bar on a nearby street, where he drank several shots of vodka. Julia was already in the bedroom, lying in bed, curled up in a ball. Things are scattered here and there. He walked around, picking them up, examining them in the light. The clothes were dirty and had not been washed for a long time. He shook her shoulder. Julia opened her eyes, sick, faded, blackened at the edges. Where have you been? She looked as if she didn't understand. I was sleeping. Julia, we need to talk. 2 o'clock in the morning, she moaned. Let's do it tomorrow. Her hair was stuck together in icicles, stuck together. God, what's wrong with her? Tomorrow we will go to the doctor. He snapped. We're going to your mom's tomorrow. It's her birthday. Now, please turn off the light. I'm tired, she muttered from under the pillow. The next day, he returned early to make sure that Julia at least washed her hair and dressed decently. Surprisingly, she was awake and the light was on in the apartment. When Yura opened the door, he heard her humming something in the bedroom. For a moment it seemed as if the past had returned, where everything was still normal, but the dust in the corners, a dried flower and dirty footprints on the wall reminded him that he had not dreamed anything. Julia, he shouted. We need to talk. It can't go on like this anymore. Listen, are you Yura? His sister peeked out from behind the door jamb. Hello. Masha? Well, but what? He beckoned to her with his finger and asked quietly in the kitchen. What are you doing here? Julia asked me to come and help her pack. Masha's face was worried and even angry when she indignantly said, Yura, she looks very bad and she may be sick. Didn't you see it? Why didn't you take me to the doctor? I would be glad, but she doesn't want to. Yes? And she says you're never at home, and you also came in drunk yesterday and yelled at her all the time. Is she complaining about me? Yura didn't believe me. Masha looked at him sternly. She doesn't complain, but she feels bad. She blames herself for what? She's sick, for not being the same as before. Yura, are you completely crazy? Do you see the state she's in? His sister looked at him with such indignation that he said, Okay, I get it. He and Masha went to the bedroom. Julia was there, standing at the mirror and trying to fasten the hooks of the dress on the back. He had already seen this dress. Yulka had worn it on her birthday. Only then did the dress fit her figure appetizingly, but now it hung like on a hanger and her neck stuck out in the neckline like a duckling. Masha quickly went up to her and fastened the hooks. She walked away with a heavy sigh, looking at her brother accusingly. They say, didn't you see? Julia really looked terrible. Her thin arms stuck out like whips. Instead of seductive shapes, a chain of vertebrae stuck out through the fabric. He was stunned by the sight himself, but lately he had hardly seen her, only in the dark, occasionally. When did she manage to turn into a skeleton? It's better to take it off. I'm going to wear a sweater and jeans, Julia said, smiling nervously. Help me unbutton my dress. I'm getting carried away with the diet. Only close relatives gathered in the parents' apartment. Mom got excited, set the table. The conversations went on as usual, the most ordinary ones. My uncle boasted that he went fishing yesterday and brought fish. His daughter joked, that fish is only for cat food. But 2 cats are full. My uncle laughed. And ours, and here's a Barsika brought. Are you satisfied, Barsik? A gray fat cat squinted at them from the windowsill and everyone laughed. On the surface, it seemed that everything was as usual, everyone was happy and satisfied, but it was not like that at all. Everyone looked at Julia, exchanged glances, averted their eyes. Now, in the bright light of Mom's living room, you could see how much she had changed, dried up, her eyes hid in dark holes. Yulechka, why are you eating? Mom nodded at the untouched food on her plate. I baked your favorite triangles. With broth and butter? I don't feel well, Aunt Sveta, she said, putting her hand to her stomach. I feel sick. Did you eat something? Probably. Excuse me, please. Everyone vied with each other to comfort her. Masha ran away to get medicines. Mom sat down next to her, took her hand. Yulechka, your hand is so cold. You're freezing. Immediately, her father brought her a warm handkerchief and wrapped it around her shoulders. They put a cup of hot tea and pills in front of her. Yura did not take his eyes off them and could not understand why he did not feel sorry for her at all. As if this is not a native, beloved Yulka, but a stranger. Or even not a person at all, because he would still feel sorry for a person. But the girl sitting at his mother's table did not evoke anything good in him at all. She raised her head, and for a moment their eyes met. She smiled out of the corner of her lips and lowered her head again. He thought, that's enough. It's time to end this. After the meal, the dishes were removed and the cards were taken out. Julia suddenly got up from the table and left the room. Yura followed. Walking down the corridor in socks, he looked around the corner and saw Julia coming up to a cat bowl full of small river fish, taking several pieces and throwing back her head, putting one in her mouth. Her lips curled in pleasure. "What are you doing?" He yelled and grabbed her arm and shoved her into the bathroom. "Julia, you're crazy. That's it, I've had enough. It's over. Do you understand? Get out of here, everyone, go to your house. I'll call a taxi." She stared at him in silence. "That's it, Julia," he repeated and left. He returned to the hall. Everyone was looking at him. "What's going on?" Julia followed, pathetic, thin, with drooping shoulders. She sat down on a chair and sobbed, covering her face with her hands. "My God, what is it?" Mom asked. "I'm him. He left me," she said without taking her hands away. "I quit because I'm pregnant." In deathly silence, Yura sat down on a stool. "Don't scold him," Julia exclaimed. "It's not his fault. It's me, changed. I found out I was pregnant the day we went to the lake and almost drowned. I wanted to tell him, but it wasn't up to that. Then I was afraid that something was wrong with the child. I went to the hospital and was examined. Then I started having insomnia. I couldn't eat anything. I just had the strength to lie down all the time. I thought that maybe I would die myself, or maybe I would lose the child, and I didn't say anything. It's all my fault." And she sobbed again. Thin shoulders swayed under the sweater. The whole family looked at him over her head like the last scoundrel. "I stopped cooking because I feel sick all the time. I'm also sleepy all the time. I cry sometimes. I want chalk, then raw fish. He shouldn't have to put up with all this if not. He wants to. Well, you know." Mom jumped up. Her eyes flashed. Hugging Julia, she led her into the bedroom. "Yura, you disappointed me." We drove home in silence. Julia kicked off her shoes in the hallway and went into the bedroom. "I'm tired. I'm going to bed." He followed, stood on the threshold. "How long is it?" From the darkness came, "I told you." He stood on the threshold and looked at the black hole of the door. There were noises there. Julia threw back the covers and climbed into bed. No way in the world would he fall asleep next to her. No way. Pulling out his phone, he texted his friend Mishka. "Can I spend the night with you?" The next day after work, Yura went back to his friend's place. Mishka reacted with understanding, said, "I don't know what you have there, you'll figure it out, but for now live with me, I don't mind." He parked his car near Mishka's house and went into the store. I threw a couple of packs of dumplings and sausages into the basket. I got in line at the checkout. The guy in front of him looked back, glanced briefly, and immediately turned around again. A wide smile lit up his face. "You? Great. How are you? Is the girl yours?" And immediately Yura recognized him. This is the same guy who pulled him and Yulka out of the water of Alexandrovsky Lake in the summer. "Great." He held out his hand. "Listen, I left then. I didn't even ask for the number." "Wait a minute." Throwing the basket, Yura rushed back to the shelves. "I chose the best cognac," returned. "Do you drink cognac?" "Don't do that." He tried to refuse. "It is necessary." "I left then. I wasn't myself at all. I didn't even say thank you properly." Nothing, I understand. You both miraculously survived that time. You saved us. Without you, both of them would have drowned. I've already swallowed enough water. So, the guy smiled out of the corner of his mouth. No, we picked you up already on the surface. You swam out yourself, you and the girl. I don't swim very well, I didn't go into the depths, but Sasha, well, my friend, he dived twice and says that there is only mud and nothing is visible. We were already thinking everything, but then you came out on your own. Misha's house smelled delicious, so delicious that his mouth watered. Taking off his warm jacket, he headed into the kitchen, attracted by the aromas. Even the thoughts caused by the recent meeting left for a moment. Yurachka, hello. But I came here for a couple of days. I need to go to the hospital here in the city. I prepared something for you. Mishka's grandmother, a white-headed dandelion 83 years old, but a very active lady for her age, was busy in the kitchen. Hello, Baba Luda, Yura said and smiled warmly. Baba Luda put mashed potatoes and cutlets on their plates and then sat down in an armchair next to them. There was a book on her lap. Yura noticed a familiar photo on the centerfold and became alert. And what kind of book do you have? Isn't this the manor here, with us? Near my house? The old lady looked down. The book is about our city, and in the photo is the demon merchant's estate, which is still not being restored. It's a pity. The beauty was indescribable, the manor. I still remember what it was like. There was also a library there. But the house has a bad reputation. And it couldn't have been any other way after what happened there. What happened there? What is it? He asked quickly and held out his hand. Can I see the book? I'll buy one for myself. The old woman held out the book and said, You can take a look. Only the book is more about the history, about the architect, and what kind of interiors the house had. Yura has already seen a lot of photos himself. So that's how it was inside. Chandeliers with 1,000 candles, the staircase still glitters with marble, and the fountain is working and it is decorated with figures of angels. What happened there? What happened there? Baba Luda sighed. Things were bad there. I was still a girl. I still remember the old owner, Merchant Demon. He built this house on the outskirts of the city, planted a huge garden around it, all the way to Alexander Lake. And the house itself was like in a fairy tale. Everything was made of marble and gilded. And then the elder demon left and left the house to his son. And that's what he did. What did he do? Yura asked. A young guy, but alone, but the money is not pecking at the chickens. It is known what he did. The wine flowed there like a river, the girls, the orchestras played all night long, one word, had fun. Then he came up with such an entertainment to invite young girls, decent but poor, so that they bathe in the fountain like mermaids. And he and his friends threw fishing rods into the fountain, only instead of bait there were paper banknotes on the hooks. And if the girl takes the banknote off the hook with her lips, then she can leave with it. And if the hook catches her lip, then she is now the one who caught her. He leads her into the bedroom. That's the fun. And they say that once, after that fun, a girl came to Kupchikov's son and said she was pregnant. She did not take money, promised to disgrace him everywhere. And so, they say, he drowned her in the fountain. And when he drowned, he took the body to the basement and buried it right under the mechanisms. Like that. And then what happened? Misha asked, who apparently also became interested. We soon found out about that. Apparently Demon's friends blabbed, but even though they found out, they couldn't prove anything. So everything would have got away with it, but the fountain in the house suddenly collapsed right into the basement and drowned. The mechanism, they say, began to leak, flooded the basement, the fountain collapsed, all as it was drowned. And the young merchant, they say, was hit on the head by a figure, and so the end came to him. She sighed again. Yura didn't say anything, Misha asked instead. Bah, where's the water in the basement from? You make it sound like a fountain drowned there. Was there a lake there? The aquifer is nearby, Yura said mechanically. He speaks correctly, Babaluda replied. The water is very close there. Alexandrovskoye Lake is nearby. There is only one aquifer. They started eating again, and then Babaluda said, and the girl who was drowned, they say that she stayed there in the basement and is looking for her lover. What? Yura asked, and the old woman shrugged her shoulders. It's an old legend, a horror story. Misha went to bed with him in one room, and Babaluda was sleeping in the second. He snored quickly, but Yura couldn't sleep. Lying on a narrow cot, he thought. It was spinning in my head. The aquifer connects Lake Alexandrovskoye and lies under Demon's estate. A girl was drowned in a fountain in the manor, but there is a legend that her soul still roams the world. He took out his phone and wrote, "We need to talk. I want to break up." The answer came immediately. Why? You know everything yourself. If you want to break up, tell me to my face. After thinking about it, he typed, "Okay. When?" "Yes, even now." Agreed. Without turning on the lights, Yura got dressed, left the apartment on the street, got behind the wheel. It was time to stop all this, but he himself did not fully understand what exactly, and frankly did not want to know. The usual darkness reigned in his apartment. In addition, a disgusting smell hung in the air. He flipped the light switch in the hallway. The light didn't come on. "Julia? Are you here?" Something rustled in the hall, and a night light came on. He took a step without taking off his feet and stopped, looking around the room in horror. The entire floor was littered with fish bones and scales. The slimy skins had time to curl and stink. He flipped the switch and the chandelier immediately lit up. In her blinding light, everything looked even worse. All the surfaces were strewn with bundles of some kind of fibers. Fat bugs with long legs were swarming in the garbage. Blue algae hung from the screen of the turned-off TV. On the table, on a pile of garbage, right on the remains of a decomposed fish, there was a fresh newspaper. White, clean, carefully folded so that he could make out the title. A woman's body was found during the cleaning of Lake Alexandrovskoye. Feeling his heart beat, he grabbed the newspaper. Yesterday, the body of a young woman who drowned, apparently this summer, was found at the bottom of Lake Alexandrovskoye. Unfortunately, the condition of her body does not allow her to be identified. A pendant in the form of a fish covered with enamel was found on the body. If anyone recognizes the owner, please call on the phone. He sobbed, looking at the photo in horror. This pendant. He gave it to Julia for her anniversary. The day she almost drowned in the lake. "It can't be," he whispered. "But now we're together, honey," a voice rasped right behind him. A hand slowly descended on his shoulder. He saw webbed fingers, greenish in appearance. "Who are you?" He couldn't turn around, he said. "I'm your Julia. I will always be with you, my love. Me and our child." He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. My heart was pounding with horror. My tongue was stuck to the roof of my mouth, but anger drove away the horror and gave me strength. He took a deep breath and spun around, trying to grab the slimy body, but twisting away, she rushed away. She was very fast, flashed and disappeared into the hallway. And immediately the lights went out in the apartment. At first he rushed after her, but in the dark he stumbled, fell with his hands right into the piles of decomposed fish. Small creatures ran squeaking from under his fingers. Getting up with a shudder, Yura wiped the slime from his hands right on the skirts of his coat and headed for the wall. He flipped the switch. There was no light. Holding out his hands, he went out into the hallway. It was completely dark here. You could only move by touch. Nothing. The hallway is small. You just need to walk to the door. The darkness was thick and tangible, as if he was pushing through it. His hands could not find the walls, although he had already walked more than 10 steps. But this simply cannot be. He has never had such spaces in his apartment. He pulled out a lighter. The flame seemed to burst out reluctantly. A tiny flame could not disperse such darkness. The bathroom door was just an arm's length away from him. Okay, he wouldn't think about how he ended up here now, even though he was walking in the other direction and could hardly get lost in his tiny apartment. You need to take 2 steps to the side. There is an entrance hall and an entrance door. Holding onto the wall with his hand, he wandered in the right direction when suddenly there was a soft sound in the hallway. "Who's there? Is that you?" He couldn't call it Julia. It was as if a claw had been dragged along the wall very close, then wet drops fell to the floor almost next to his shoe. He rushed to the side, pushed open the bathroom door and slammed it shut, latching the latch. He took a step away from the door. Waited. Everything was quiet on the other side. He took out his lighter again and clicked it. I was horrified by the sight of the bathroom. Everything is covered in fish bones and mucus. The greenish water in the bathtub is almost up to overflow. It's disgusting. The lighter burned his skin and he took his finger away, but immediately, without looking at the pain, he turned the wheel again because a moment before the weak response went out, it seemed to him that the water in the bathroom was swaying. When the light came on again, it became clear how bubbles rose to the surface from under the water, then the water swayed, mud and greenish algae surfaced, and behind them a head appeared above the water, small like a child's. Only this creature didn't look like a child at all. Greenish transparent skin framed black eyes without pupils. "Dad," it muttered in a monstrous voice so that he could barely make out because water was pouring out of an almost fishy mouth with swollen lips. Ura stepped back, looking for the latch behind his back, but instead of the door he came across something slimy, cold. 2 arms wrapped around him, squeezing him tightly across his chest. A woman's voice whispered in my ear. "This is our son. Isn't he handsome?" Ura was buried a week later. The dried-up body hardly looked like a young, strong guy, and people at the funeral passed on various strange rumors to each other. The body was found in his apartment, in the bathroom. His heart stopped and he lay there until the door was opened. They said the apartment was a terrible mess, worse than the homeless. As if the witnesses could not go beyond the threshold, people felt sick from what they saw. He probably drank a lot, since he brought it to the point that not only ordinary people, but even the police who came to the call, got out of the apartment green, then smoked for a long time on the stairs, breathed air through the window. No one knew that the expert, a young guy, only after the institute, made several reports on the nature of the garbage. The investigator read them, of course, but only shrugged his shoulders. The report also said that the garbage in the apartment, river sand, shells, fish scales, and bones, and algae have the same origin, that is, they were collected from the same reservoir. No other debris was found, except for sewer blockages, as if deliberately pushed into the apartment. The investigator filed reports to the case, which he closed. No corpus delicti was found. The death occurred due to cardiac arrest. It happens, even for the young. The case has been archived. When the closure of the case was announced, the expert decided to inspect the apartment again, for himself. All this is too unusual. Why did the drunk bring sand and algae from some reservoir? Why did he scatter it on the floor? And, most importantly, how did he find live, bluish algae in winter? Was he really drilling ice? Why? The expert wanted to take a couple more samples of water from the bathroom because the first analysis showed that it was not tap water, but lake water, which could not be taken from anywhere in the bathroom of an apartment building, and it was really difficult to believe that the drunk was carrying water from the lake. He examined the tub once more, looked into the murky green of the water. It was hard to see. The lamp was barely shining. He noticed that in this apartment any lamps and lanterns did not really work. They dispersed the darkness into a light twilight. He took water samples into test tubes, put them in a bag on his side, and decided to flush the water to see if there was anything interesting at the bottom. He put his gloved hand into the water, trying to find the plug. There was no plug, and his hand never found the bottom, although he lowered it almost to his shoulder. The next moment, it was as if someone had fleetingly touched him there, under the water, and a voice whispered in his head, calling him. Feeling the hairs on his skin stand on end, he rushed back, rushed out of the bathroom and out of the apartment.